Hello, I think we're recording straight away, which is useful because it usually does all sorts of funny things. Let's see if we can get the camera where it should be. Hit this, I think. No, okay. Hello. Right, do 3, 2, 1 as usual. Make myself look reasonably. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Hello, and welcome to our weekly Shir on Parshas Shavuos with the commentary of the Alshich Megilas. Only this week, as it's coming up to Shavuos, I'm not going to be talking now, Erev Shabbos, about the Parsha, which is Bamidbar, which we will do, which I will put an extra Shir in, or the normal Shir next week. We won't lose out on that. But as it's coming up to Shavuos, and as we read Megillas Rus, and as the Alshich Megilas Rus is outstandingly superb, I thought it'd be worthwhile to give you a little taste of what the Alshich has to say on Megillas Rus, and I'll catch up next week. At the same time, as normal, we give you the opportunity to dedicate a share, if you would like, for to mark a simcha, like the birth of my new grandson in Yerushalayim 2 days ago, or to commemorate maybe a sadder memory, the loss of somebody you loved. Whatever the good Jewish reason is to dedicate a share and create zachusim for yourself or for your loved ones, then please just email me at yy@rabbiyyy.com. That's it, yy@rabbiyyy.com. I'll be very, very pleased to do this. This week, nobody got in touch to sponsor the share, but I do want to sponsor the share because in the memory of somebody who I just heard, it's the Meron tragedy, or something to a connection with the Meron tragedy, a direct connection. And it's a very strange thing. And forgive me if I say the next sentence because it's going to sound very callous and wrong, but please just hold fire for a second. The strange thing is about what happened in Meron just a couple of weeks ago is that, now here's the bit that sounds bad, there were 45 casualties, only 45 casualties. I want to say only, it's because, I don't know, I think there's supposed to be 15 million Jews in the world, and of the 15 million, the ones who are Shomer Torah mitzvahs, I have no scientific answer for this, but I would guess 2, 3 million perhaps. And in the Haredi world, obviously a little bit smaller as well. And yet, the reason I say only 45 is because it's really a small number in comparison to 3 million. And yet, I honestly don't know of anybody who I've spoken to in the Haredi world since the tragedy in Meron that somehow, directly or indirectly, it has touched their lives. And so my niece, her daughter-in-law's nephew was tragically killed in the Meron disaster. And then there is a boy in yeshiva I teach in, whose brother was killed there. A boy who I teach in another yeshiva is a cousin of that boy. But this week I just heard that 2 of my very dearest and early university students, their son passed away. So I'd like to dedicate this shir in part to be an aliyah for the neshama of Moshe Bergman, originally from Manchester. And his name was Moshe Ben Lahavdil Reb Meir Eliezer. And it's funny because Meir Eliezer and his dear Rebbitzin, whenever they saw me and they had their children when they were little, used to schlep the children and point to me and said, you're only here because of him, because I was the shadchan of the boy's parents. And tragically, I think they've been married for a 1.5 years. If I got the story right, they hadn't as yet had any children, and they went to Meron to daven in that holy place. And this was of the tzaddikim who are buried there, that they should be given that brocha. Instead, obviously, Hashem had other calculations. So again, for Moshe Bergman, there should be an aliyah for his neshama, and there should be a huge nechama for his family. Second of all, as I'm recording this shir, you will and we will be well aware of the appalling situation in Eretz Yisrael, the appalling situation both militarily, the battles in the streets between Arabs and Jews, the support, which, as always, the West's media and increasingly the West's politicians, particularly in the United States of America, in the new administration, are giving to the appalling attacks on the Jewish state and the Jewish people, and with nary a word of condemnation. And certainly it's interesting to know that the new atmosphere, the new temperature that is perceived in the change of administrations, which previously had kept very, very much the lid on such appalling Iranian-inspired terror, suddenly that fear of reprisals from a strong America supporting its ally, having been presumed to be removed, seems to have given a green light to all sorts of terrible things. So I would like to also dedicate the share to the Jewish people, particularly those in Israel, but the Jewish people all over the world. And I'd like to read something to you. This is from Rabbeinu Bachya. We're not yet get to our share. But when the Posuk famously says, when Hashem gives his final command to Moshe Rabbeinu to go to tell the Jewish people to go and wage a war against the Midianites, who, if you remember, had enticed, seduced, got the Jewish people to engage in all sorts of behavior, which caused thousands to die. Then the Apostle says, in the Nikmas B'nai Yisrael Esa Midianim, go and wage a war of vengeance against the Midianim. And here the Apostle calls it a war of vengeance of B'nai Yisrael, for the B'nai Yisrael. And after that, then you will be gathered up to your people. As your time up, you will die. But when Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people to wage that war, he doesn't say it's a war of vengeance for what they did to you. It's a war of vengeance for what they did to Hashem. He changes it. And why? So I want to read to you what Rabbeinu Bachya says here. Nichmas b'nei Yisrael. Comes b'nei Yisrael. And Moshe said, Nichmas Hashem. And I come off Hashem. Only Moshe l'Kadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe said to Kadosh Baruch Hu, Rabban Shalom Almighty, if we were uncircumcised, or of divided Zorah, if we worshipped idols, just like everybody else in the world, they wouldn't hate us. We would be like any other people, like the Irish, or the French, or the Italians, the Russians. They would just be another people. And why do they hate us so much? It's because of the Torah and the mitzvahs that you gave to us. And it's interesting, although he doesn't say it, and of course that we accepted at Mount Sinai, and as we're just days away from repeating that process. Rabban Shalom, they hate us so much because we said Nasa ben Ishmael will accept your Torah, and we stand out by performing your mitzvahs as different to everybody else, and that's why they hate us so much. And that's why it's a war of revenge against you. When Moshe changes it, you say it's a war against us. There was a war against us, and it's a war to avenge what they did to us. Moshe changes it to say it's a war to avenge what they did to you. It's the same thing. Because we accept your Torah, because we are a reflection, when we are our best, of what you want for the world, that's why they hate us so much. Well, the Kacham says, let's say it's Nekamas Hashem b'Midian. It's been Nekamas Hashem in Midian. Because when you're fighting a war against the Jewish people, ultimately, whether it's stated, whether it's implicit, whether it's conscious or subconscious, it's a war against the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And what's going on in Israel just now, so many times, is just merely an expression of exactly that. So Rabban Shalom, as the Jewish people face yet more incredible hatred, please remember it's because we represent you. And please protect the Jewish people and wage a war of vengeance against those who would destroy the Jewish people and attack you in this world. Okay, having said all that, rather serious, of course, I'm now going to share my page only for a few seconds so that you will be able to pause the video if you're watching it, or I don't know exactly how you do this if you're listening in your car, but basically I'll be doing my best to make sure, even if you are listening, you'll be able to, without the text there, be able to follow what's going on, although it's obviously better to have the text in front of you. Okay, fine, so I'm about to share the screen. Just for a few seconds, get ready to take a screenshot and then we'll go back to me. So if I do this, and then I share the screen, and there's always this terrible pause, sorry, worry that things have gone wrong. And there you are, good. So there is the Megillas Rus, or the bit of Megillas Rus that we're going to look at. And so please take a screenshot, and I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm assuming that you've either got your Megillas Rus in front of you, or you're able to see that. And again, I will do my best to explain it if you don't have e-text in front of you, and I'm stopping sharing, and then you've got me back again. Fine. Okay, so Megillas Rus. Megillas Rus, I think, is the Alshich at his very, very best. I'm sure you know that the author of Megillas Rus was Shmuel Halevi. And so let's have a quick look at the summary psukim. There is so much to say here. I mean, it's one of my favorite Svarim and favorite commentaries of the Alshich. So really, I could spend a long time, but I'll try and time myself and keep it within reasonable boundaries. Let's look at the first passage. It wasn't the days when the judges judged, and there was a famine in the land. And it says, a Yelech Ishnaman went Lechem Yehuda from Bethlehem in Yehuda, Lagur, to temporarily stay Moab in the fields of Moab. Who Ishto Shnei, he and his wife and his two sons. He and his wife and his two sons. Now the Alshich here is got a ton of questions, which really, if I just told you all the questions, which are all astonishingly brilliant, as are his answers in the first passage, that's all through. So I'm going to miss out a lot of them, obviously. But something I do want to point out is, as the Alshich does, whenever it says Vayhi, it means something bad's going to happen. Vahoyo, and it was, means something good's going to happen. Above in front becomes that will be. Vayhi, similarly, something bad's going to happen. Not similarly, the opposite. So the question really is, what was the bad thing that happened? To which you'll say to me, surely, well, there's a famine in the land. And I would say, no, look at the passage. Vayhi be mishvat hashoftim, and it wasn't the day when the judges judged. Vayira of Boris, and there was a famine in the land. So the fact that there was a famine in the land has its own Vayhi. That's the second Vayhi in the passage. So what was the first Vayhi talking about? Remember, Vayhi tells you something bad's going to happen. So the problem really is when the pasuk says, and remember it's written by the prophet Shmuel, so therefore if a prophet is writing this, and we assume it's Ruach HaKodesh, then basically he is the secretary writing down the dictation through the medium of Ruach HaKodesh, or what Hashem what's written, and therefore we can bring the same criteria of analysis that we normally do when we're looking at the Alshich, which is if there's something wrong with the text, then it can't be accidental. If it's in the wrong tense or the wrong gender, there's a reason for that. Anyway, what is the Vayhi? What's the first wrong thing, bad thing? The second one has got its own Vayhi, the famine. But what's the first Vayhi? So the pasuk says, and it was Vayhi be mishvat hashoftim, in days when the judges judged. So the Alshich, with his trademark sense of humor, says, oh really? Why did I have to say that? I mean, what else do judges do? Play tennis? Well, perhaps some judges do play tennis. Certainly they play golf. The question really is, why does it have to repeat in the days when the judges judged? That's to state the obvious. To which the Alshich explains, the pasuk is telling you that in this period in Jewish history, it was a time when they judged their judges. Remember that the only reason that the Jewish people get to live in the land of Israel is because we keep Torah and mitzvahs. This we read just recently in Shul and the Chukoisai, Be'im Chukoisai Leichu. And the said of Chukoisai, if you go in my statutes, you go according to the way which I've told you to go, then you get to live in the land of Israel. And if not, you can lose that. You can lose that tendency. Certainly, or secondly, you can find the exact same process and the exact same explained and clarified in the second, nothing more controversial in the second paragraph of the Shema. And the second paragraph of the Shema says the exact same thing. Just checking if my phone is switched off, otherwise we will have phone calls in the middle, which I have now switched off. So therefore, if you keep the laws of the land of Israel, the laws of the Jewish people, you get to live in the land of Israel. Something we talked about many times before, of course. Now, on that basis, therefore, if the Jewish people are judging their judges, now in Parsha of Shoftim, the Parsha in Torah says, which is called Shoftim, it says that the appointment of kosher judges in and of itself is insufficient to keep the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. Because when you appoint Dayanim, who are God-fearing and impervious to bribes, etc., then you're saying that you value the law, the Jewish law, the Torah law, that they are enforcing. But if it's a time when you judge your judges, in fact, the rabbis say that whatever the judges would judge somebody was guilty of and would estimate that should suffer, or she should suffer a certain punishment, instead of accepting the judgment, then they rejected it. Instead of wanting to administer the punishment to the criminal, they want to do it to the judge. So it's a time of complete anarchy and rejection of the very anchor that keeps us grounded in the land of Israel. And therefore, with that anchor removed, then we're going to leave. Well, there are two ways in which Hashem can make his displeasure with the Jewish people clear. The situation that we have at the moment, this very moment in Eretz Yisrael, with missiles coming across from the northern border and, of course, the southern border, wherever Iran controls, in other words. When you get a situation like that, then basically, of course, people move further away from the point of conflict. That's one way Hashem can show his displeasure with the Jewish people. Another way he can show his displeasure is to have the opposite effect, and that's to send along a famine. Because if you send along a famine, instead of people going shrinking into the land of Israel, they go in the opposite direction. The verse says, a famine in the city scatters feet. People run away from a famine. So if the Jewish people are not valuing the land of Israel, if they've lost their tenure there, then of course Hashem can send along a famine and not make sure that they leave. And yet, strangely, only one person does leave. But before we get to that, let me just repeat what we said. That is to say, the first Vayihi was the first bad thing that happened, was they judged their judges. The consequence of that was the second Vayihi. Vayihi of Ba'oris was a famine in the land. That was to get rid of the Jewish people. And yet it says, one man goes from Beis Lechem Yehuda, Lagor, to temporarily stay in the field of Moab, who he, the Ishta Shnei Banav, he, his wife, his two sons. And I can't resist telling you that another Alshich here, just very, very quickly. If you notice, it says, and the man went, and then it stops talking about him. It tells you where he comes from. Let's repeat that to you again. If you're looking at it, you'll see this. It says, V'yelech ish, and it doesn't say, and his wife and his two sons. It interrupts and says, from Bethlehem and Yehuda, and then it's him and his wife and his two sons. Let's say, V'yelech ish Ishta Shnei Banav. Why? Now, of course, the man, as we'll see shortly, is called Elimelech, and the greatest rabbi of the generation. And there's a whole lot to say about why he left, and why only he left, the greatest rabbi of the generation, which we don't have time to go into. However, it's certainly, we'll see shortly, a big mistake that he makes, and the consequence is actually going to be his downfall and his death. But leaving that aside, notice the fact that when it writes it this way, it splits the man up from his wife, V'yelech ish, and then it tells you something about his background, and then it goes back to say, and his wife and his two sons. Why does it split them up? And here a very, very important idea. And there's somebody called Elie Wiesel, one of the greatest chroniclers of the Holocaust himself, a victim of Auschwitz, who writes in one of his books, and I can't remember which one, and when I was a young fellow I read, that it says that more than the Nazis piling them into trucks to take them out of the little Hungarian town called Sighet, which he was brought up in, to take them to the concentration camps, more than the trauma and the horror of that particular moment, he said, was the reaction of his neighbors, his friends, the kids he used to kick a football with, who either pretended it wasn't happening or just looked blankly with no concern whatsoever as they were driven away to their deaths. It's the opposite of the Jewish reaction. If somebody is suffering, if somebody's in real pain, you have to react. Again, I think I saw it in Elie Wiesel, but certainly somebody else who chronicled the Holocaust pointed out, when the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, when the Nazis moved in to try and liquidate the ghetto and found the Jews that smuggled in weapons and fought back ferociously, when that occurred, there was a fairground nearby with a Ferris wheel, and there were families there when the shells are being fired, tank shells being fired at buildings, the rat-a-tat of machine guns and rifle bullets, rifle shots being fired. And when people, boyfriend and girlfriend, husbands and wives and children, are going up to the top, the zenith of the Ferris wheels turn and coming down, they could see exactly what's going on, and then they just carried on as though nothing happened. The world looking away, as it is doing in the situation in Israel just now, is so anti-Jewish. anti-human being, actually, and certainly anti-God. When people are suffering, you cannot fail but to react. So when you see in the story of Noah, when Noah and his family go into the ark, it says Noah and his sons and his wife and his daughters-in-law. In doing it that way, notice that the men are separated from the woman, Noah, and then his sons, not Noah and his wife, Noah and his sons, then Noah's wife, then the daughters-in-law. So in that way, there's a separation between the men and the women, because you don't carry on normal married life. Nice, togetherness in every sense of that, marital sense of that word, when people are drowning outside and dying. But when they come out of the ark, at the end of the process, you will see that it says Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives. So now they're back together again because people have stopped dying. But to ignore what's going on, to carry on normal married life when people are suffering, and people are suffering in the land of Israel. So when they leave, even though they're together as a family, but they are, the husband and wife, Elimelech and his wife, are separated. They're not living as husband and wife together when people are suffering starvation. Positive base. Now, remember, our rule is that God's good at Hebrew, and there's no word in the Torah, or if it's in Tanakh, inspired by Ruach HaKodesh and written by a prophet, there is no word that's extra either. So then it says, Shemo Isha is Elimelech, and the name of the man was Elimelech. Shem Ishta was Nomi, and his wife was the name of his wife, the name of his wife was Nomi. Shem Shnei Bonav, and the name of his two sons was Machlon Bechilion. Machlon Bechilion, Ephratim, who were aristocrats from Beis Lechem Yehuda, from Beis Lechem in Yehuda, by Yavos, they Moab, Yisham, and they came to the field of Moab, and they were there. Well, could they have come to the field of Moab and been anywhere else, says the Alshich? They came to the field of Moab and they were there. Oh, really? Not in Scotland. No, not in South Africa. Yeah, I'm glad you told us that. Well, of course, you're going to come to the fields of Moab. And fields, incidentally, is a euphemism, says the Alshich, for cities. They came to the cities of Moab and they were there. Now, the interesting thing is here, if I was to ask you what bit of posset base is redundant, did it not need to say? The answer is almost all of it. Because it could have said his name in the first posuk. The first posuk just says a man went, and his wife, and his two sons. But it could have said, and there was a famine in the land, and Elimelech, and Nomi, and the two sons. Why does it repeat the whole thing here? And that they came to the field of Moab and were there. So the Alshich says here, I think, something which is incredibly interesting. You see, when they come and they leave the land of Israel, technically they've done absolutely nothing wrong at all. After all, God sent along a famine in order to get people to leave. I would point out, however, and again, it's the Alshich says later on, that when the famine is actually lifted and is actually over, the astonishing thing is that this Jewish people, whose performance and affection for Torah and mitzvahs, as we saw just a few seconds ago, was hardly in any way admirable. In fact, they weren't interested in it at all. And yet the love of their land, the love of Eretz Yisrael, was so strong that nobody left except one family. And that was enough to allow Hashem to hope the message had got through, but to lift the famine. They still showed a love for something Jewish, something important, the land of Israel. So says the Alshich HaKodesh. But back to this. So in the first pasuk, it says that they come to Lagor b'Snei Moab, to temporarily stay in the fields of Moab, which means the cities of Moab. To temporarily stay is very important. They didn't intend to be there for a long time. And to secure that, to guarantee that, they went from place to place. They went from New York, and then went to New York, and then went to Chicago, and from Chicago went to Los Angeles, and Los Angeles they went to Baltimore, etc. They became the stereotypical, the historical cartoon of the wandering Jew, not wanting to put down roots. But by the end of the second pasuk, they put down roots, and they came to the field of Moab, and they were there. I was once staying in, visiting Eretz Yisrael. My youngest son, who just became a father, again in Yerushalayim, 2 days ago, I was just a baby himself, and we come back from the house of my brother-in-law, and we're stuck at Lod Airport, which of course people are today because the airport has been closed because of threats of missile attacks. And they were waiting for an El Al flight to take us back to the UK. We were sitting opposite a frum lady, and I started talking to her. She also had a baby, and it turned out she was the daughter-in-law of one of my great teachers, Rav Halpin Zichasada Yibrocha. I got very excited that my Rebbe's daughter-in-law was there. We started to schmooze. She explained that she and her husband started off married life in Petah Tikva. I think it was Petah Tikva, the greater Tel Aviv area, certainly. But they couldn't make ends meet. And therefore they decided to come back to England. They bought a house in Golders Green, because a house in any capital city is almost guaranteed to exponentially grow in its value year on year. They hoped that they both got jobs, they were working. They hoped that they would be able to stay there for X amount of years and then come back, having sold the house at a nice profit and bought for themselves, instead of renting, an apartment now, so perhaps even two, one to live in and one to live off. And she said something which was very intriguing. She said that the property they bought was a mess, it was a wreck, and needed massive, decoration and improvements and repairs. And her husband wants to spend the money, borrow the money, and spend it in order to do that, I suppose, in order to maximize the reselling value. But she said, but I won't let him do it. And she then added, because if we do it up and make it look nice, it will stop being a house and it will become a home. It will stop being a house and it will become a home. And she said, I don't want that to be our home. Our home's here in Eretz Yisrael. It was a very, very important statement. It shines very much a light on this pasuk and these two psukim. In pasuk 1, they haven't put down roots outside Eretz Yisrael, and as a consequence, it doesn't say who they are. It doesn't let the cat out of the bag. It doesn't expose them, because they've done nothing wrong. But by pasuk base, when they've now turned their house into a home, when they stop being wandering Jews, then at that point, then it tells you who they are. And then in the next pasuk, Gimel, Bayomas Elimelech ish Naomi, and Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, then he dies. Now notice it says Elimelech, the husband of Naomi. Before then, she was his wife. There's a wonderful moment in a person's life when I hope earlier on, my children, they often told me this, people said, oh, are you Rabbi Y.Y. Rubenstein's son or daughter? And there's hopefully a sense of pride that their father's got a reasonably good reputation. But there comes a stage, and I should give you a blessing that we all reach that stage ourselves, when people, instead of saying to your children, are you such and such a person's son or daughter, but they turn around and say, wow, are you mentioning your son or daughter's father? In other words, the spotlight of admiration and covet has moved generationally from the Eltern, as they say in Yiddish, to the parents or grandparents, to the next generation. And Baruch Hashem, I'm quite happy to say that I'm more than pleased when people turn around and say, well, you're the father of, and mention some of my children. It's a lovely transformation. There's no jealousy or feeling of being superseded there. It's a great thing. In the first pasuk, Naomi, who was a very, very great woman, but still her greatness was eclipsed and subservient to that of her husband. She was Ishto, his wife. But having done what he did by staying out the land of Israel, when he could have gone back to the land of Israel, then his status is now that he's connected to her. That's his yichus. That is his boast. Bayomas Elimelech ish Naomi. But Ishor, and she is spared. She and her two sons. That's interesting here to point out that the Alshich says that really she deserved to die too. There is an important point to talk about here, and it's not directly from the Alshich. It's from somebody called, let's see here, Schwerber. Oh, I moved his books right there. I moved a shelf earlier this week, or the books, I should say. And he said something which is very interesting. He notes the difference in approach between Sarah towards her husband and Rivka towards hers. When Sarah sees Abram doing something wrong or something which she disapproves of, then the approach is really quite strident and quite strong. She tells him not to do it, what to do instead. If you forget the cartoon, but she gets out the frying pan or the rolling pin. That's not the approach of Rivka. Rivka's approach is when she sees her husband about to give the wrong brocha to the wrong son. He wants to give the big brocha, which should be Yaakov's. She wants to give to Esav. She doesn't go in with a frying pan. She doesn't have a Sarah approach, demanding that he changes his mind. That's why she does what she does, telling Yaakov to pretend to be Esav, etc. She acts in a much more subtle and indirect way. So Sir Tzvi Hirsch-Ferber, who's the author of those books, the first Manchester Rosh Hashiva, for Tzvi Hirsch-Ferber, I actually have one of his books here. If you're, it's got a lot of reflection going on. If I turn it there, you can see, let's see Hirsch-Ferber. Can you look at there? Give me an idea what he looks like, or he looked like. Absolute genius. I'll come back to it very shortly. He points out that it's the role of a wife to know which button to press. Do you press the Sora Imena button, or do you press the Rivka Imena button? The frying pan or the indirect approach? In actual fact, ultimately, it's the role of every wife to work out that men with their extremely fragile egos, I mean, the really clever wife gets them to do what she wants them to do without even knowing that it came from her, because of men's fragile egos. But it's really that a clever wife knows which button to press, or which button to press when. And basically, Naomi should have pressed the Sora Imenu approach button when her husband was staying outside the land of Israel. So she deserved to die as well for her absenting herself from that role. But she's got another important role to fulfill, and that's coming soon, of course, and that is she's going to be the sponsor and the conduit through which Rus is going to come into the Jewish people. So she's got a reason to survive, even though the finger of blame from heaven points firmly at her too. So she is spared, and her two sons. Let's move to the next pasuk. V'yisalehem noshim aviyas, and they marry a Moabite woman. Shema Achaz is Orpah, v'Shema Shenis is Rus. And so the two sons, now the father is dead, marry women who are Moabites, Moabite princesses. Shema Achaz is Orpah, the name of one was Orpah, the name of the first, I should say, Shema Achaz, or the first was Orpah, the Shema Shenis is Rus, and the name of the second one was Rus. And they lived there for 10 years. And then it says, next after this, let's look at Pasuk Kei, and they both die, Machlon Bechilion. Machlon Bechilion Dishar, and she again is spared. Isha are left over from her two sons and her husband. Now, the first thing I have to note here, which I didn't point out before, is now I should, as I told you, I have a mazel tov because I have a new grandson in Yerushalayim, which means in a few days' time, please God, at the right time, then he will be given his bris and will be given his name. My son and daughter-in-law like to choose nice, interesting names from Tanakh. And so, in fact, interestingly, my youngest grandson from their family is called Boaz, which of course is center stage in the Rus story. One of our other sons called Yehonadav, and that's an unusual name, Yehonadav. You can look that one up. So I'm always interested to find out what names they're going to conjure out of Tanakh that I've never heard of before, despite being a rabbi. However, one thing is absolutely guaranteed: they're not going to call their son Machlon or Chilion. In fact, there was nobody called Machlon or Chilion. This is the name which the prophet Shmuel is being told by Hashem to give them. Such a debate in the Gemara exactly whether this was their real names or two other names. Yoash and Soref was actually their names. So there's a debate which way it went round. However, let's stick with Machlon Bechilion. Machlon, says the Alshich, comes from the word Mechila, and that means to be forgiven. Chilion comes from the word Kalia, which means to be destroyed or exterminate. So if somebody has a baby boy and somebody hasn't seen him until after the bris, so he says, "Wow, I heard you had a baby boy, I heard you had a bris, fantastic, what did you call him?" He says, "Oh yes, I called him destroyed or exterminate." No, that's never going to happen. So the question is, why was one called Machlon, one was called Chilion? Why was one forgiven and one not, one destroyed? And indeed, one was forgiven. Machlon was forgiven, Chilion wasn't. But forgiven for what? Well, there are two possibilities. One is that they're dying for the exact same mistake that their father had made, which is they stayed outside the land of Israel when they could have gone back. Okay. Two is that they married out. They married non-Jewish women, and sadly, their spiritual level, that would be a big crime. But the problem with this is obviously that whatever they did, they both did the same thing. Both married out or both stayed out. So why should one be forgiven? And how was he forgiven? Well, and this is only really a taster, but the whole book of Rus is a story of reincarnation. And not only that, it's a story of something called Yibum, which is that somebody whose brother dies, leaving no children, and his wife is not freed by the death to go and marry whoever she wants. She's still tied to one of the remaining brothers, and they have to marry her. They can choose not to, but if they marry her, then the first child is not named for the genetic father, who would be the surviving brother, the second husband, who was previously the brother-in-law, but rather the first husband, because there is an assumption that the soul of the first husband will be reincarnated in the child that she will bear, the first child that she will bear, such an extent that the first child is called Ben, the son of the husband, the first husband who is deceased. And the idea of Yibum, therefore, is to bring back the soul of the dead husband, because he's got no children, and his own descendants who can carry that forward, carry him forward, because reincarnation normally happens in the same family. So the problem really is that if one is forgiven and allows the process of Yibum, which is what Ruth is involved in when she marries Boaz and becomes pregnant that night, has a child called Ovid, she's actually having the soul of her dead husband come back to the world. She gives birth effectively to her dead husband. So he's forgiven for what he did wrong and gets another chance to put it right, which is what reincarnation is all about. You're back again in order to achieve something you failed to achieve in a previous life, or to repair damage that you did in a previous life. Once more, we return to our question. But as they both did the same thing was wrong, they both stayed out, they both married out, then why should one be forgiven and the other one not? And the answer is really quite simple, and it's a very clever reading of the Pasuk through the eyes of the Alshich. So again, if you look at the Pasuk, or if you think, listen carefully, it says, V'yisalahem noshim Moabios. They marry Moabite women. Shema Ach is the name of the first one, was Orpah, but Shema Shem says Rus, and the name of the second one was Rus. Why not just say Orpah Rus? Why does it emphasize the name of the first one was Orpah, and the name of the second one was Rus? Well, of the two brothers, we've already been told that they're called Machlon and Chilion. Machlon was the oldest one, that's why he comes first. Chilion was the younger one. Machlon was married to Rus, but Chilion was married to Orpah. And that's why it says they marry no Moabite woman. The name of the first one was Orpah. In other words, Chilion, the younger brother, married out first. And Machlon, he was a Nochschlepper, the older brother did not. He held out, but his resolve to hold out was weakened by his brother marrying out. That weakened his resolve. He eventually marries out as well. In other words, in Judaism, you're not as guilty if your resolve is weakened by somebody else. Then it was harder for you to withhold from doing something wrong. And therefore, the person who caused that weakness in you, not only is he guilty for his own weakness, but he is guilty for the damage he's done to somebody else as well. That's why Machlon is forgiven and Chilion isn't. That's why their names hint at their fates. Machlon forgiven and Chilion destroyed. Okay, V'yesh Hashem Shom Ke'es Hashonim. And they lived there for 10 years. Now, I want to come back to that very shortly. But it's important to point out, this says Ke'es Hashonim, not Eser Shanim, 10 years. It's like around Eser Shanim. And very often, as the Alshich points out, it will round it up to 10 years, like we normally do. $99.99 cents is $100. But I want to come back to that point because that's the point that's going to really be very, very important very shortly. But I would like to take you through some more exciting stuff. And they also die. Machlon b'Chilion, the shore Ha'isha, and now she's left over. Sorry, this is Pasuk Hey, from her two children and from her, or she's been spared from her two children because she should have intervened in them as well, and from her husband. So she's lost everything. We're talking people kind of say about Shavuos Mistemov, Pasuk Vav, and she gets up and her daughters-in-law, and they start to return from the cities of Moab. Ki Shama Mistemov, because they heard in the cities of Moab. Ki Pogan Hashem Samaylos Islam Lechem. Hashem had remembered his people, had forgiven his people to give them bread. The famine was over, and again, as I mentioned to you before, very much in part because of the fact that under the worst circumstances, they still did not want to leave the land that Hashem had given them. But and they went from the place which they had been, the same question we asked before can apply here too, but I'm afraid I don't have time for all the details. But don't worry, if you're seeing something wrong with the posuk, I can almost guarantee you the Alshich saw it as well, and the answers are brilliant. But again, I'm trying to get as much of it as possible. With the two daughters-in-law with her, but B'Derech, and they go on the road L'Shub Eretz Yehuda to go back to the land of Yehuda, the tribal land of Yehuda around about Yerushalayim. But Tamar Nomi L'Shtei Chalaseh, and Nomi says to her two daughters-in-law, Lech no shavno, go back and return. Sounds a bit strange, that really. Come back and return like a yo-yo. Go away, come back. Isha l'be'asima, each one to your mother's house. Yas Hashem imochem. Hashem should do with you chesed kasher asithim amamesim imodi, as you did with me and you did with the dead, your dead husbands. The chesed she did with the two daughters-in-law did with Naomi was to say that they did not demand any financial kasuba, any recompense from her for the death of the husband, financial recompense, support, and also they made the tachrichim, they made the shrouds to bury their husbands in. Okay, well that's significant Kabbalah. It's like significant Kabbalistically, but we won't go there. What I would like to point out is there's something wrong with the Hebrew, something big, obvious, 101 Hebrew. Judaism is wrong with the Hebrew. Let me read it to you again. Pasuk Ches. But someone Nomi says to her two daughters-in-law, Lech no shavno, go and come back. Now, of course, we know that all the laws of Gerus, all laws of conversion are deduced. The specifics of the laws, I should say, are reduced. You find this in your idea, Rish Samaches, if I remember rightly. Then the laws there are all deduced from Nomi's interactions and reactions to her daughters-in-law. She's going to reject their attempts to become Jewish 2 or 3 times. Okay. But of course, the big question really is that how can she reject them becoming Jewish if they're already Jewish? So let me pause there. So we've got 2 possibilities. Now, Elimelech, as I mentioned very briefly before, was the greatest rabbi of his generation. The Alshich certainly says that his sons followed very, very closely in his footsteps. But how could they possibly marry a non-Jewish woman? Well, the answer is, obviously, they didn't. They converted them. But if they converted them, how can Nomi demand, go back to your mother's house, as she does in this pasuk here? If somebody's Jewish, if they have had halachic conversion, even if the day afterwards they declare that they're eating pork and they don't believe in God, they're a Jew who's eating pork and doesn't believe in God. And sadly, there's quite a few of those. So there's no difference whatsoever. If somebody's Jewish, they're Jewish, whether you're born Jewish or whether you went through the conversion process, they both have the exact same effect. You can never stop being a Jew. Well, if that's the case, how could Nomi tell them to go back to the land that they came from their mother's house, if they're Jewish? And this is a question which occupies the Zohar and occupies the Midrashim and the Gemara and the various rabbis involved in this investigation very, very intensely. And I struggled very, very much with this for many years. And I was very lucky. Let's go back to the rabbi I told you about before, Ritzi Hirschfarber, in his book, Kerem HaTzvi. When I was looking at his commentary, he mentioned the fact that there's a book, he said, called Emunas HaChom, which he alluded to as having an answer. Now, Emunas HaChomim was written in Padua, and about 500 years ago. And it's interesting that this rabbi, who, as I said, lived in Manchester, had an extremely famous library. He somehow managed to get hold of manuscripts and books that nobody else had. I have a friend in Manchester called Rabbi Goldberg, who himself sells books, and he said he remembers as a boy his father taking him in to see this rabbi, and he was astonished by the number of books he had on the shelves. It was a vast library, but the titles were all, many were obscure. So here, Ritzi Hirschfarber found a book called Emunas HaChomim, they published in Padua, and I couldn't find this anywhere. And the hint was that he had the solution to the problem. And he starts to tell them, he didn't tell me in the detail that I was looking for. I needed to go hold of the original manuscript. I spoke to many people who were, because some Jews, that's their expertise, is publishing and books that were published, etc., thousands, hundreds of years ago. And nobody could help me with finding this book. And I had an idea. One of the most famous libraries in the world, a more modern famous library, of course, is the Library of Congress in the US. Then there's the National Library of France, which is very, very famous, world famous library. Of course, it was the famous library in Alexandria, which sadly burned down, but it was the receptacle of all the knowledge of the ancient world. And the other one is the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And I spoke many times at Oxford University, and that was the one I felt most comfortable speaking, as my French has now become totally useless anyway. So I phoned the Bodleian Library and asked to speak to the librarian in charge of the Hebrew section. Now, to be incidentally a librarian in the Bodleian Library, one of these famous libraries, is not somebody's going to say, oh, you'll get Harry Potter in shelf A, row B and shelf A. These people who are professors, their academic standards are astonishing. They know the history of all the books that they have. Anyway, so eventually I was put through to somebody called, if I remember rightly, Philip. Somebody called Philip. He was extremely charming. I think I recall he seemed to know me from my BBC broadcasts. And he was extremely kind, extremely friendly. And he said he is aware of the book. He is familiar with the book, the Sefer, I should say. But they don't have a copy in the Bodleian. However, he said, Rabbi, I have a very close colleague at the Vatican Library in Palermo, I think it was. I can't remember if it was actually in Vatican City or in Palermo. But he said, I know they have a copy of the book. It's called Father Paul. I'll give you his phone number and please send him best regards from Philip. Very, very nice, very charming, very English. And so I phoned Father Paul. The exact same process. Could I speak to Father Paul? Somebody got him and he came. Nice Italian accent. Asked if he spoke English, which of course he spoke perfectly. And I explained that in the first instance, I have the very best regards from Philip. I forgot the second name at this stage. And I told him what I was looking for. Yes, of course we have the book, he said. Well, I don't want to be unkind because he was being kind to me, but of course they have it because they confiscated it when it was published. So many Jewish books had to be checked by the censor beforehand, and if they found something in it they didn't like, they either destroyed them or they simply buried them away in their libraries. But anyway, he very kindly told me they had the book. I asked him, would he be able to photocopy some chapters of the book for me, which he was very happy to do. And then he faxed them, and I have them actually here. Inside, I keep them inside that book that I was talking about before. And he gives a very simple answer to the question. This is when it was coming. And so we're going back hundreds and hundreds of years to Italy, appropriately enough. Saying it was from Italy, I was able to recover it. I'm trying to find the right page. Oh, where is the... I should have prepared this better before. Oh, I've dropped the page. Anyway, I do remember. Okay, so rather than waste your time, here, this is the answer he supplies. The answer supplies, it goes like this. There is a machlokus in the Shulchan Aruch today, whether or not two can constitute a beis din for conversion. If somebody who's not Jewish wants to become Jewish, it has to be in front of a beis din, but a beis din is normally three. The question really is two good enough? According to the Rambam and the Rif, then two is insufficient and the gerus is nothing. It's just a zero. You need three. According to all other opinions, bidi evid, if it happened, it shouldn't have happened, it's not the ideal, but if it happened, it's still acceptable. Two would constitute a sufficient beis din to make a conversion valid. It's really quite simple. The two opinions, these two opinions are manifest themselves in Nomi and her two sons. Her two sons constituted the beis din as far as they were concerned, which halakhically is correct, to allow them to make a beis din and convert Nomi and Orpah. But Rus and Orpah, sorry. senior moment, Rus and Orpah. But Nomi, she held, like the Rambam and the Reef, no, the Rambam and the Reef hadn't been born yet, but certainly that halakhic understanding, she held that two is insufficient. That's why she's able to tell them to go back to the place that they came from, because from her point of view, it was not an illegal, but a conversion which had no validity, an invalid conversion. But note that they married out. And again, the halachic position is that bidi eved, that it's okay. So they've done actually ultimately nothing wrong. So therefore, that's why Nomi would reject them. The question is, if it's done nothing wrong, why should they die? The answer is that even though halakhically they may have a valid point, that halakhic point had not yet been accepted by the Jewish people. And as a consequence, that on their spiritual level is what they've done wrong. Fine. But Nomi now says that you go back to where you come from. And then we go into some Kabbalistic aspects of the Alshich. And this is tremendously interesting because I said to you, if you remember just a short time ago, I said to you that there was a question here, a 101 Judaism question on the Pasuk, and I broke off in the middle, so let's return to Pasuk. Yes. But Nomi says to her two daughters, Lechno Shavno, go back, return, Ishalabes Imo, and that's in that come and go. She is rejecting them, but offering them a path back at the same time. Go, but come back if you want. Ishalabes Imo, back to your mother's house. Yas Hashem imochem. Chesed, Hashem should do with you chesed like you did with your dead husbands and with me. But the word imochem is in the masculine. And this is a woman talking to two women, so it should say imochen with a nun at the end. And the next pasuk we get the same problem. V'yitin Hashem lochem. Hashem should give to you that you should be able to find peace and contentment. Lochem. Lochen. And this takes us into Kabbalistic idea. Now, there was a long-standing tradition in the Jewish people that the Mashiach would emerge from Moab. Moab, of course, is a country that started with Lot in the incestuous relationship with his two daughters, which produced two children who founded two nations, and not only, the rabbis say Moab, which Rus comes from, was the most disgusting of all the nations in the world. We call them the Uma HaBazuya, the most disgusting nations. They started from incest and boasted of it. Moab, from my father. That's Lot and his two daughters. Interestingly, if you're interested in Kabbalistic thought, Rus was a reincarnation of Lot's oldest daughter. Anyway, as I pointed out, reincarnation is a massive feature of Megillas Rus. So, in the story here, it's in the masculine. Why is it in the masculine? So it's essential that Moab is a key component of the story of the coming of the Mashiach. And the reason, at a very simple level, is that when the Mashiach eventually comes, you will find that his background is frankly embarrassing. We start with Lot and his daughters, that's incest. Then we move on to Yehuda, and Yehuda sees his daughter-in-law by the side of the road, thinks she's a prostitute, commissions her services, and indeed gets what he paid for. Of course, that's the next stage. So prostitution, incest, prostitution. How about David HaMelech? David HaMelech and Bathsheba, so let's just throw adultery into the mix. And so on and so forth. That all the major staging posts of the coming of Mashiach, they're not the sort of thing you want people to know about, that you have in your background. But when Mashiach comes and he's the king of the entire world, if you go and see the Mashiach and let's say you're having an argument with your neighbor or your business partner, and he judges against you and judges in favor of your partner, and you lose your temper, say, oh, it's all right for you sitting in your big palace in Jerusalem. What do you know about life struggles? Have you got to struggle like I had, working to build yourself up from nothing into this? And okay, so I didn't pay the tax, or I took too much money, whatever it is. But what do you know? Well, that cannot possibly be allowed to be the perspective of those coming to the Mashiach, because they won't come to the Mashiach in the first place, the king of the world. He's got to be able to turn around and say, oh, yeah, you really think so? You think my life was so easy? In fact, the Gemara says nobody's appointed to a position of authority of the Jewish people unless he has a kupa shel shrotzim, a box of creepy crawlies hanging around his neck. The English phrase, which is the parallel, would be a skeleton in the closet or the cupboard. Then he can say, yes, I also come from a tough background. That's not an excuse, and indeed, no, it isn't. Of course, people with tough backgrounds got a higher mountain to climb. It doesn't really say you can't climb it. Well, all of the Jewish people, or all of them, but the whole story of the Jewish people is having tough backgrounds and overcoming it. So there's this idea that the Mashiach will come from Moab. More than that, because all the marriages are, not all of them, but many of the marriages of the messianic line are embarrassing, frankly. That was to divert the Sultan's attention from the fact that these were the marriages that were going to produce the Mashiach. But he thought this couldn't possibly be. You're kidding, a Moabite woman? Ugh, I don't have to worry about that. I'll busy myself doing other stuff. That's a lot more. I mean, I expressed that too flippantly. That's a very serious point in my new book on the subject of Jewish women, truly great Jewish women then and Jewish women now, which, as I said, is an essential guide for any husband, and to have waiting the next time he annoys his wife and he's trying to get back into her favor, then he simply produces the book, Truly Great Jewish Women and Jewish Then and Now, and gives it to her. Very wise move. That's why it's a bestseller. Anyway, the Alshich says the following thing. Already talking to the Alshich, come on, Lovish, Noin, this Kabul, Al Horace, Morris, the Emes, Hatuman. To understand what's really going on here in Nomi's rejection of Rus, etc., and that masculine, then masculine form instead of the feminine form, there's a couple of Kabbalistic ideas you have to have. One, that the Zohar says that a tzaddik cannot exist in heaven unless it has a garment to keep it warm, and the garment is the soul of a ger, the soul of a convert. The soul of the convert is the garment which is worn by the tzaddik in heaven. In other words, that no tzaddik who's truly a tzaddik does not have an effect beyond the Jewish world to the non-Jewish world to inspire people who want to come and join as a consequence of their greatness. That sort of idea. So point number one, that a real tzedekah will have an effect and inspire other people as well. And certainly Nomi was one of those. And therefore, she will have there'll be a female garment for her in heaven as well, figuratively speaking. Two, there's no doubt whatsoever, he says, that Nomi was an outstanding tzedekah. In fact, as Rashi quotes from the Medrash Rabbah, that Nomi, again, I'm not sure if Nomi was her real name, just like Machla Bechilin wasn't their names. It's even questionable whether Rus, that was her name as well. But leaving that aside, Rashi certainly says that Naomi was the name that everybody gave her, because Naomi comes from the word Ne'imah, meaning very pleasant or beautiful, and she was such a beautiful human being, such an exceptional human being, that everybody loved her. And immediately comes to mind is the late Lady Jacobowitz. Anybody came into contact with Lady J, just totally fell in love with this person. She was absolutely fabulous. I think of somebody, a super Lady J. Naomi was like that. And therefore, anybody who came into contact with Naomi, she was somebody of that caliber. But not only that, she would be and becomes the Rebbe of Rus, obviously. He says, Shlishus kilo bilvad hasiga yoda al malas hakisha. Not only was she an exceptional human being, ki im gam al geda ruach hakodesh, as the Alshich, but she also reached the level of ruach hakodesh. That is to say, she has prophetic insights, and it would not have escaped to the Alshich to explain that the fact that as part of Jewish tradition in the Kabbalistic realms chiefly, that from Moab was going to be becoming the next link in the chain of the Mashiach, for reasons which we alluded to in a second. And it's certainly on her radar that one of her two daughters-in-law could be that person, could be the person who wants to become Jewish and be that next link in the chain. And what comes next is that the girls cry because she's rejecting them. And when they cry, go back to your mother's house, go to Posuk Yud, but tomorrow law, we're going to go back with you to your people. Posuk Yudalav, Yudalav, goodbye, my daughters, why would you stay with me? Oed Libonim B'mei, I still have children to give birth to. Well, Anoshim can grow up and do Yibum to you, marry you, and allow you to have children. I'm never going to get married, I'm going to have any more children. But usually the two case the like ish gami on the one way. You wouldn't say I must marry somebody but I would have children. Alhentas Marina Asher Ygadlo Alhenta, we built the Yos Ish Asher you would wait all those years, you wouldn't want to be married to somebody else. Marley Ma'oidnichin. Oh, my situation is much worse than yours. He also be Yad Hashem, his hand has come against me. But Seneconan, but Keno Oid, and we cry again, Apatisha Orpo Lachamoisa, Rus Dovkabo. But what happens is that Orpah kisses her mother and mother-in-law, but Rus stays attached to them. Now, the kissing. This comes up a lot. She kisses, nobody kisses her daughters-in-law. Where does she kiss them? So the Alshich says something astonishing. She kisses them on the lips, not on the cheek, not on the forehead, but she kisses them on the lips. To kiss somebody on the lips, Kabbalistically speaking, is a very, very significant thing. When Hashem created the Odom Rishon, he blew the soul through his lips. The greatest tzaddikim, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, all died by the neshika, the kiss of Hashem, a kiss on the lips, which drew the soul out again. They died painlessly. I'm not going to go Kabbalistically there. But a kiss is a connecting of souls. When Naomi is kissing her daughters-in-law on the lips to bid them farewell in her discouragement of their conversion, she's also Kabbalistically, remember the Alshich said to somebody who had Ruach HaKodesh, she's able to detect whether inside one of those women is another soul, a masculine soul, the soul of her dead husband. And indeed in Rus, she finds that soul there. That's why it's in the masculine. That's why the apostle, which I pointed out to you before, Hashem should do imochem in the masculine with you, and lochem in the masculine. There was a male figure. There was masculinity hovering about here, the soul of her dead husband, and that through Rus, there is going to be the possibility of him coming back again. Interesting. Now, let's just turn to Rus because it is Megillas Rus for just a second. The point I pointed out before, and then we'll have to end because moving on. The point I made to you before with regards to Rus having been married to Machlon for 10 years. Now, what do you think they talked about, husband and wife? I don't know if you've ever been in the house of any of the greats of the Jewish people, but when you sit at their tables, they generally aren't talking about football or the New York Yankees. The conversation is all around Torah, Divrei Torah, Gemorahs, Divrei Hashkafa, Jewish philosophical ideas. It's a completely Jewish, immersed in Jewish thought. And indeed, the 10 years which Rus is with her husband, who's a huge Talmid Chacham. Of course, they're husband and wife. They will obviously behave like husband and wife and talk about, have small talk as well. But Rav Shamshon von Hirsch in Pirkei Avos points out when it says, Al tarbi sicha meisha, don't spend too much time speaking sicha with with your wife, says the Mishnah. It's talking about your own wife, let alone somebody else's. It says Rav Shamshon von Hirsch that sicha means small talk, light-hearted talk, simple stuff. He says that if you're lucky enough to have a wife, don't waste the opportunity to seek her insights into the big questions which you're considering in your life. Don't speak sicha, speak deep stuff. I don't think it's idle to speculate that Rus, if this woman had such potential that one of the greats of the generation wants to marry her, sees in her greatness, it's not idle to speculate that the 10 years that she spent with her husband were 10 years of growth as a Jew. In fact, there's an echo here of the story of Moses and Moshe Rabbeinu being imprisoned by Yisro for 10 years, in a dungeon for 10 years. And there's always really the intervention of his wife, or wife-to-be, who kept him alive and brought him food. That Zipporah, then she would be the one who would also convert through the process of her association but the man is going to become her husband. This is crucial. Now, as we have completely run out of time, I do want to point something out which I think is very, very exciting. This is my translation of Shar B'Tochen of the Chovos Levavos, which is the book of Emunah. If you're interested in developing a real relationship with Hashem, this is the book, the classic book we have to have. And at the end, and I've been teaching this to a group of men in the shul I daven in for the last, I think, nearly a year. And last Shabbos we finished. And when we get to chapter 7, the Rebbeinu Bachya, he explains exactly the highest levels of Emunah and B'tochen. Now, Emunah means belief in Hashem. B'tochen means not trust, which is normal translation. But in my book, I translated it following Ramatzio Solomon's, his translation, that B'tochen means certainty. And the Ramban says every Baal B'tochen is a Baal Emunah, but not every Baal Emunah is a Baal B'tochen. If you've got B'tochen, you certainly got Emunah, but to have Emunah doesn't really say B'tochen, that's a level very, very high. And this is what he says at the end. This is in chapter 7, and he says the following. The next level of recognition of a Baal B'tochen is to understand, so this is really, really up at the top, understand the degree of concern and compassion Hashem has for his creations, that he will be content, that you will be content with whatever Hashem decrees for you. Not just verbally, but truly in the depths of your heart. Now, these are just words, so I'm going to slow down here because these are big words. Let me do it again. The next level of recognition is to understand the degree of concern and compassion Hashem has for his creations. Then you will be content with whatever Hashem decrees for you. Not just verbally, but truly in the depths of your heart. You will smile at every circumstance that comes your way. Death and life, poverty and wealth, health and illness. On this level, you do not look to things that Hashem has not chosen for you. Instead, you embrace and want only what he has chosen for you. Throw yourself fully into Hashem's designs and accept his decrees with love, no matter how they affect your body or your soul. And that, let's see here, is in page 301 of the book. And I turn the page. Conclusion. It's right at the end. It's the final words, the final message of the author of Chovos Levavos. And it rings a bell with Rus. It rings a bell with Rus because if you look back, I think I showed you in the screen share, I'm sure, but that Pasuk Tezayin, when Naomi is telling her to go back, her sister's going back, when she's saying to Rus is telling her, the Tomer Rus El Tezayin, Alf Tezayin, but Tomer Rus, Altiv could be, don't pressure me on this one. Lazavek, don't pressure me to abandon you. L'shuv me al to leave you. Ki al asher taliki elach. Where you go, I'm going. Over asher talin oni, where you sleep, I'm going to sleep. Amech ami, your people are my people. El hay chalai, and your God's going to be my God. Asher Thomas, where you die, I will die. V'sham ekovem, that's where I'm going to be buried. I ask Hashem me. That's all I want Hashem to do for me. Whatever Hashem wants to do for me, or do with me, that's fine. And only death will separate the two of us. It's almost an echo of the words of the Chovos Levavos. Whatever Hashem sends along, this is a woman who was a princess, is quite happy now to go into the field and pick up the little grains of corn and wheat that have been dropped by the harvesters, and maybe have enough for a little bun to share with her mother-in-law that night. But she was a princess. Whatever Hashem sends, that's okay for me. Exactly what Shar B'Tochen said, because she used those 10 years. And she reaches the very highest levels of B'Tochen, the highest levels of certainty in Hashem. And there's a beautiful idea that this woman has made herself, despite her background, the next link in the chain of the Mashiach, who's taken every single opportunity to grow, who when, says the Yerushalmi in Yevamos, Perikes Halach Gimel, says, interestingly, that Boaz said to her, had you come one day earlier, I could not have married you. And the marriage leads to Oved, who leads to Yeshayahu's David, and eventually Shlomo Melech, and eventually the Mashiach. Because only on that day, at that particular moment in time, was it decided in the Sanhedrin that a Moabite woman is acceptable to be married into Jewish people. Before that, it could never have happened. Everything you've made yourself, every opportunity, every crossroads that you came to, that you grabbed, carpe diem, you grabbed the moment and grew, including the 10 years of your husband, including all the humbling stuff, the hard stuff of going and gathering in the grains, going against your nature when Naomi told you to jump into my bed to do Yibum, or for me to do Yibum to you, all of that, which of course went against your nature. That's what a Moabite girl would do, not what a Jewish girl would do. All of that led you to this moment in time. And you remember the night after the night of the marriages when Boaz dies, he only lived long enough to be able to complete that moment in time to conceive the next link in the chain of the Mashiach. She took every single moment of her life and used them to grow and become Rus, who would be the mother of the Mashiach. That's just a taste of the Alshich. So much more, but I think it's in English as well, so you might want to treat yourself if you find English an easier read, or just have the joy of doing it in the original Hebrew. And I shall look forward to putting up another video before next Shavuos on Parshas Midbar to get us back on course. So let me wish you a good Shabbos. We should only hear good news from Eretz Yisrael. We should have family simchas. Those of us who need a Nechama should have a Nechama, and you should have a wonderful Kabbalas Torah, a wonderful Shavuos, and hopefully when you're reading the story of Rus, you'll find some of these ideas still in your mind and useful to you. Good Shabbos.